Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Even if you're joining us by recording later on, welcome to Meet the Grantmakers online. My name is Angela Richardson, and I'm a senior trainer at the Grantsmanship Center. Here we offer grant services and training. And on behalf of everyone at the center, I want to thank you for being here. If this is your first time, welcome. You're in for a real treat today. And if you've been with us before, then you know how wonderful these conversations are. And today's conversation will be no different. It's such an important time for us all to be gathering to have these kind of conversations. I want to say a quick thank you to the other sponsors of today's events that helps make it possible. Of course, the Grantsmanship Center, Grant Station, and also Foundant Technologies. Together in collaboration, we all come together to provide the space for these panels to happen once a quarter. So thank you again to them, and thank you to you all for being here. Today, we have a panelist of 3 different individuals representing funding agencies around the country. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to them, and I will in just a moment. And just so you know, the links to their profiles are available. We'll drop that in the Q&A, so you can look at their geographic location, the kind of things that they fund, and more detailed information about them to see if they are right for you. So with no further ado, I'm going to start our introductions. And I'm going to start with Don Knickerbocker. Don is the Vice President of Philanthropic Strategies for the National Congress of American Indians Foundation, located in Washington, D.C. Thank you and welcome, Don. So great to have you. Next, we have Linda Garrett-Johnson from the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation. She's the program officer for community impact in St. Paul. Welcome, Linda. And then next and finally, we have Ben Chou. He is the Democracy, Rights, and Governance Program Officer for the David and Lucile Packard Foundation in Los Altos, California. So thank you all so much. We've got the East Coast, West Coast, and right in the middle represented. So I'm so grateful to have you all here. So the first thing I'd like to do is invite each of you to introduce your foundation, tell us a little bit about what makes you unique. We'll get into some more about your current initiatives and thoughts that you're having about the current environment shortly. But for now, I'd love to hear the introductions. And Dawn, I'm going to start with you for the introductions.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm Dawn Knickerbocker. I belong to the Anishinaabe people from White Earth Nation called Gawababaganakalg in our language. I'm enrolled in the Minnesota Chippewa tribe from the Ottertail Pillage Band of Indians, and I'm the Vice President of Philanthropic Strategies for the NCAI Foundation. NCAI stands for the National Congress of American Indians. We're the voice of tribal nations. The National Congress formed over 80 years ago to help have a collective stance. We have the Embassy of Tribal Nations in Washington, D.C., and all of the tribes in the nation come together at least 3 times a year to go through what's called the resolution process, where they deliberate and they find consensus around issues of national significance. So in my role, and what the NCAI Foundation does is unique in the funding landscape. We're the only foundation directly accountable to all 574 federally recognized tribal nations. We were created by tribal leaders for tribal nations to ensure that philanthropic resources flow in a way that respects sovereignty, that center Native leadership and support tribes in shaping their own futures. So we work across sectors: civic engagement, digital equity, climate action, food sovereignty, public safety. Since the pandemic, we've taken on a greater role as a grant maker and a regranter, moving millions of resources to Native-led organizations and tribal governments.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Dawn. I look forward to hearing more. Next, Linda Garrett-Johnson.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning. I'm Linda Garrett-Johnson with the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation. And our foundation is a statewide community foundation that serves Minnesota. Community foundations bring together the financial resources of families and individuals and organizations who care about a specific place and then invest their resources back into the community. In 2004, the St. Paul Foundation began what we call a grant-making redesign process to explore how we can best disperse our community resources to address current issues and better realize the goals of each of our organizations that we want to serve. And then as a result, we redesigned our grant-making process using two new applications for grant seekers. One is called responsive grants, and the other is system-level grants. And later I can maybe speak a little bit more about each of those. And then we also have our funding priorities, which are looking at adapting and supporting programs and initiatives in specific areas, such as advancing equitable democracy, growing and sustaining an inclusive economy, support for community resilience, strengthening the arts and culture, and increasing access to housing. That's in our system level grants. So I'll talk more about those specifically once we have a chance to get into those details.
Great. Thank you. Welcome, Linda. And Ben.
Hi, everyone. I'm with the David and Lucile Packard Foundation. We are a family foundation that supports leaders and organizations across the world to do three things. First is to invest in children and families. Second is to protect and restore our natural world. And third is to create our just and inclusive societies. Just three quick examples of our work from the last 6 decades. The first is we helped to create something called the Forest, People, and Climate Global Partnership, which is a donor and organization alliance helping to reverse tropical deforestation and to advance sustainable development with the goal of reducing global greenhouse gas emissions by 10 to 15% by the end of this decade. The second is that we help to support a coalition that launched the O pill, which is the first ever over-the-counter birth control pill in the United States, designed to be more accessible for more women. And then lastly, we provided investments that help to expand California's universal preschool and transitional kindergarten program. And it's now the largest in the country, on track to serve 400,000 students by 2026. And I'm happy to share even more about our work in the conversation to come.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. And again, welcome all. So we're going to move into the question and answer part of our panel today. Down for those of you that are watching, there's a Q&A down at the bottom on the toolbar, so you can send in your live questions. So thank you all. A lot of you, over 50 people, sent in questions in advance. So we'll do a combination of live questions and questions in advance. So feel free to start dropping those questions now. I'm going to start with some of the ones that came in advance, so thank you all for doing that. And I was sharing with the panelists as they were arriving that of the 50 questions, I would say about 75% of those questions that you all sent in was some version of, things are changing in the funding environment. With the different cuts to federal funding, with a different emphasis about the Department of Education. So the question I want to start with to our panelists, and Linda, I'm going to start with you, is this is one of the questions. I'm interested in learning how private funders are preparing to navigate the anticipated increased need in light of federal funding changes. So let's start there and we'll pull some of the threads from this discussion. Thank you.
Sure. Well, what I will say that, and we're not a private funder, we are a community foundation.
Would you describe the difference for the viewers?
Yeah. So like I said a little bit in the intro, that a community foundation, what we do is we bring together financial resources of families, individuals, and organizations who care about a specific place. and then invest those resources back into the community. So we're considered a community foundation, not a private foundation. So ask me the question again. I just want to make sure I get the right answer.
Absolutely. I'm interested in learning how funders are preparing to navigate the anticipated increased need in light of federal funding changes.
Yeah, so one of the things that we are doing within the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation is working with some of our philanthropic partners. And one of the things that we are a part of recently, we call Philanthropy Forward. It's a group of leaders that meet every other week to discuss and coordinate responses regarding that. And so our foundation has been working with others to create what we call a pooled fund. And to date, we have raised close to or a little bit more than $800,000. And the idea is, or our plan is to for the pool fund has not been fully finalized yet. But one of the things that we'll be doing is looking at how do we then use those funds to impact the community.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you. Ben, how about you? How about your order?
Yeah, I want to express like the genuine and I know disheartenment of seeing a lot of the federal funding dry up, how that's hurt many organizations and communities across the country, actually across the world, from the cuts that have been happening. At the same time, want to balance that with the recognition that there's not enough money in philanthropy to fill the gaps in funding from the federal government. They're just, there's not enough money for that. And so I think the harsh reality is going to be that there's going to be a significant gap. And and so what each foundation is able to do is going to be determined by the boards in our leadership. I know here at the Packard Foundation, we have made a first round of responsive funding, similar to what my colleague here, Linda, had mentioned earlier. I believe we made $10 million in responsive immediate grant making as a result of the funding cuts that happened earlier this year, and we may have more coming. But that said, I've also seen other foundations across the country increase their payout rate. So I think different foundations are acting in a different manner depending on what their boards and their leaderships are doing. And so highly encourage everybody here to think about how you can also step up, whether it's in your own individual giving, to help continue to support the important work that needs to be done.
Thank you. And Dawn, how about you?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Linda and Ben, for sharing this. And we just have to name that this is not just an increased need, but it also is increased harm. And at the NCAI Foundation, we kind of saw this coming in a way that tribes have been on the front lines of government cuts for many, many generations. And when the first executive orders were announced this year, in February, we didn't wait. We convened a group of over 50 intertribal organizations and experts across Indian country, and over 500 people showed up to the initial Zoom call. And we had to quickly upgrade our Zoom account. and so from that point on, what has happened across Indian country is tribal leaders, legal partners, organizers, policy folks, and intertribal organizations have gathered together in what we now call the Coalition Group. It's a network of Native-led organizations that stand together. They have a password-protected website, and I think their brand new website has actually just launched today, and you can find that at NCAI's website. So we didn't just build like some capacity and infrastructure, not just like a listserv or a task force, but we are very focused on creating an ecosystem of care and resilience. And we want philanthropy, of course, to be a part of this. As Ben mentioned, this is about our boards, and this is about where we want to be very well informed, and that we're responding by activating new tools that is needed at this moment. We know this is going to be a long period of time. And so we're actively trying to facilitate things that can move money quickly and protect what is sacred, legal coordination, advocacy infrastructure, and we're not focused on filling the budget gaps. We're focused on holding the line.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. I want to keep pulling the thread on this. There's a live question that came in that's similar to one that came in, and this one is specifically about DEI. Ben, I'm going to start with you on this one, just because I'm rotating. And the question has to do with, the question says, could you discuss how the current administration and executive orders about essentially some of the current executive orders around DEI and how that's affecting institutions? And specifically, this individual wants to know from your foundation's perspective, where institutions are being asked to address that within and how they operate. What are some of the resources or some of the strategic moves your foundation is considering in light of that?
Yeah, and I would say that every foundation is different, right? With different leadership and different boards. And so every foundation is going to have different responses. At the same time, every foundation also lives in different contexts. Different states have different leaders. With different states, you have different attorney generals and different enforcement that may have higher scrutiny given to a certain foundation. Here in California, we are relatively lucky in comparison. And here at the David and Lucile Packard Foundation, I'm proud that my leadership, my president and CEO, issued a statement that we will not be changing our policies and our values when it comes to DEI, and others will actually be doubling down on our current strategy. And so as a result, we're not changing here at the Packard Foundation. That said, I think that every foundation needs to take into consideration their own risks assessments. And I know that everyone is seeking their own legal counsel. What I would encourage all the nonprofits to do is also similarly, take into the risk calculation of what will be facing. We've seen the attacks on different parts of civil society already from the current administration, whether it be on law firms, universities. There's anticipation that foundations and philanthropy may be next, and the nonprofit sector as well. But given all of that, we want to put out there that there is a resource that many of us in the democracy space have funded called the Democracy Protection Network. You can Google that, democracyprotectionnetwork.org. It provides free or heavily subsidized services for what my colleague Dawn mentioned earlier. One of the examples is legal services, rapid communication services, physical security, and cybersecurity as well. So all of those, if you're in the democracy space, certainly, or if you are an organization that feels that it may be threatened by current administration's attacks, this is a place to consider going to for free or reduced services.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Democracyprotection.org, for those of you that didn't get it.
Democracy Protection Network.
Sorry, democracyprotectionnetwork.org. Thank you. Dawn, let's pick up with you all or NCAI around the executive orders and DEI and your organization's response or thoughts about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So our board consists of 27 tribal leaders from across the nation, all of whom run nations. And so their response was very fast, in that this moment calls for philanthropy to deepen its understanding and commitments. I'm very proud to say that, the idea of diversity, the idea of equity, the idea of inclusion are values that we hold very dear. The hard-won wins or the hard-won battles that have happened through time have benefited everyone. So we want to emphasize that tribal nations are not merely another demographic within the DEI framework, we are sovereign governments with inherent rights and unique political and legal relationships in the United States, while at the same time, we have been acting in solidarity across racial groups, across identities, in an intersectional way since time immemorial. And this has been affirmed, this political relationship with the United States by the Supreme Court. So the federal government's rollback of DEI initiatives, it really threatens to obscure this critical distinction of the federal recognition and the trust in the treaty responsibility. And so from a philanthropic lens and resource distribution lens, we need to recognize that supporting place-based communities like tribal nations, it transcends diversity metrics. It's about honoring commitments, and it is about upholding sovereignty. So in response, what we are really leaning into and doubling down on is our equity and sovereignty framework. It is an approach that centers on supporting self-determination, priorities that are accountable to the people that they affect, and also the legal and policy advocacy work protecting and advancing the rights and the treaties of Indigenous peoples. And then also, thank you for the shout out to the resource bend, because infrastructure investment is really crucial to help supporting the continuation of the wins from DEI, building capacities that reinforce the strengths of communities is crucial.
Thank you, Dawn. And Linda.
So I wanted to say that I definitely agree with Ben and Dawn. Our foundation is thinking very similarly. And like you said, Ben, we are fortunate in Minnesota to be in the state that we're in. We have we have strong support from our state attorney general. And the St. Paul Foundation. At our foundation, we not only look at this as an issue, we also look at it internally in terms of how do we live that out, not only in terms of our grant making, but also as we are individuals within the organization. So for us, DEI is it's not a word or a term. It's how we live out, how we work together as colleagues in the foundation. And then that in turn is how we do our grant making, how the lens that we do our grant making through. However, we understand that, these are times that where there are a lot of executive orders and the shifting political landscape. So we also, our CEO has put out a blog, and if that can be put in the chat for folks to read later. But I just want to say from there that our CEO said that we remain unwavering in our support to build a resilient and inclusive community that advances aspirations for everyone. So for us as a foundation, we're very clear about where we stand on that. We're working with our donors, our community partners, other organizations in the St. Paul and Minnesota community, political leaders and nonprofit leaders as well, because we feel like this is very important. We want to make sure, but we also want to make sure that the nonprofits in Minnesota that we support understand that we're not moving away from DEI. And it's not, so for us, DEI was not just something that was done. It is who we are as an organization.
I don't know about you all that are watching, but the clarity that you three are providing, it's just it's calming my nervous system and making me feel like, there's always changes. I mean, we're in a critical moment, but I am really hearing, along with some of the practical tips and some of the ways that your funding agencies are thinking about this, just real clarity that is inspiring. So I want to thank you for that. I want to pull one more thread about some of the changing environment. And this is coming in live, and it's a little bit specific to different kinds of organizations. But one of the questions is about schools with the Department of Education. So public schools being local education agencies typically are not available for private funding sources. So I think one of the questions, there's been a couple of different questions. One of them is like, what would a strategy be for, organizations like that serve constituents? Because I think a number of you serve children. And I think that educators that usually are reliant on federal funding they've always thought about, oh, how do we diversify our funding? But I think now with some of the changes, the schools and education for young people is coming to the forefront. So that's one I'd love you to speak to if you have something to share around that. And then the other one is for small grassroots nonprofits. So, either of those, it's a very specific context, but if you want to speak to either or both of those two types of organizations. So Dawn, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Yeah, in terms of like federal funds being in limbo or how there have been rollbacks, the National Congress of American Indians has put out a statement condemning the executive order to dismantle the U.S. Department of Education. So specifically for funders and how we're funding local communities and supporting local education, I think we should be, and maybe we need to step back from the 501c3 trap. Sometimes the most trusted community infrastructure is not a nonprofit organization. It's not always a tribal education department. Maybe sometimes it is a Native-led cultural group or even an informal collective of aunties keeping kids fed and connected. So before creating a new entity, ask who's already trusted. What kinds of partnerships could carry the work forward with integrity? There are fiscal sponsor organizations. Of course, that's why the NCAI Foundation was formed. We're able to work as an intermediary, and we can hold and move funds legally without losing the relational grounding of our work. So you can also look to intermediaries in local communities, look to some community foundations who might have that same kind of flexibility. And then for the smaller grassroots organizations, I'm on the board for the Urban Native Collective where I live. And so, first, we don't have to call ourselves small. We're close to the people, close to the land, and close to the story. And so focusing on our clarity of purpose and our values and, don't try to mimic the language of larger organizations in this moment, but be very specific and rooted in what, your work does and do it with dignity. And so I think philanthropy needs that voice right now, more of it, not less.
Thank you. Linda?
So I'll answer that question from looking at what we're doing going forward in terms of our responsive grants in 2026. We've been funding youth and education for some time now, but what we're going to be doing is doing it slightly different, in that we're going to have what we call responsive grants in 2026. And these will be and we're actually going to be clarifying our process towards the end of the year. So what I'm telling you now is high level information, but we're going to be putting those details out at the end of the year about how people can apply and things like that. But so youth and education is something that has always been a priority of our foundation. And we fund youth and education. We've funded youth and education in a variety of different ways. In the past, we've done program grants, we've done project grants, and then more recently, we have done general operating grants to organizations. Going forward, like I said, we're going to be doing what we call responsive grants. That will be done on a rolling application process. And it'll be to support ongoing or urgent or emergent or timely community opportunities, for allowing us to be able to respond specifically to those types of funding requests in the community. What we're looking, and we are a community foundation that funds a specific part of the Twin Cities as well. So we're geographically bound through the foundation, and the sizes of our grants could be up to $50,000 per year for a period of 1 to 3 years. So that's, for our community foundation, some specifics. But in terms of youth and education, that is a priority for us. That is something that we have funded in the past. We will continue to do that. There are nonprofits that come to us. We have collaboratives that come to us and work together. There's sometimes partnerships with school districts or with school programs and things like that. So there are a number of different ways that we fund youth and education.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Ben.
Yeah, at the Packard Foundation, we don't have a specific education program at the Packard Foundation. We do have a maternal health and child care program. And so that's where a number of our, I would say, maternal health, child health, healthcare programming comes from. In terms of your other question regarding grassroots organizations, we do also have a local California program that supports work in 6 counties in Central California. So it goes as far south as Fresno and as far north as San Mateo. And you can look at our website online or the documents that were provided for those 6 counties.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. So next, I want to switch reels a little bit from talking about the environment and get out. I think one of the things that I'm taking away from this conversation, number one, is that each of you represents a specific entity. And so, Ben, as you have said, different funders are having different responses. So, though this is a conversation, for everyone, definitely take a look at what's happening locally, get to know what your funders are doing locally, what are their initiatives and what their responses are. And also look at your own kind of risk assessment and your own capacity and that type of thing. So I want to shift the focus a little bit to communication. So as we're looking at, let's say I live in Georgia and I want to look at, what are the initiatives that are happening in my local community, and I want to initiate some conversation. The question is about what are 3 specific basic questions that are important to ask grant makers when in a conversation about anything, about seeking a grant, not just about the specific topic, but when seeking a conversation, telephone, Zoom, or email, to start to build a meaningful relationship. So in general, we're building relationships with funders. So Ben, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Yeah, I think that the best first question to always ask is to really understand what the funder's priorities are. So you want to, here's a sample question. What's your theory of change? What is the goal that you would like to see accomplished? What's the problem that you want to address? Understanding what the funder's priorities are usually would be very helpful for you, because then you can see, one, is the project that you have in mind something that fits squarely within what the foundation would be interested in funding? And then secondly, what the funder's interested in, is that something that you yourself are interested in actually doing? Funders, what we are pretty easily able to sniff out is this something that's a real passion project for you that you're going to dedicate 5+ years of your life to? Or is this something that you are simply changing your current existing organization just to adapt to what we want to see done? And so I would say really try to get to know what the funder wants to be seen and done and what problem they want to address. And that will really help you to clarify whether or not it might be a good fit.
Dawn?
Yes. Well, Ben stole my answer. So just kidding. No, I do think asking how foundations define accountability is important. For some foundations, that means their board. For some foundations, that means, who their, review panels are. And then it really does go back to what their priorities are. Where did they get their priorities? So is it from a community, and that does play into the theory of change. Another question is examples of what a partnership that worked well. I know a lot of different philanthropies and some of the larger foundations like to deepen the work over time. They like to be in thought partnership with their grantees to see what is possible. And remember that foundations have access to a lot of different resources because they are in conversation and in relationship with longtime grantees. So they've seen what works and what didn't. So I guess another one would be like, what do you wish applicants knew to understand how you make decisions? Ask them, like, how, be very tactical. How do you get to your yes? And maybe that can help you sniff out whether or not you're wasting your time. Because grant applications and the process is a lot of effort.
Yeah. On both sides, right?
Yeah.
for the writer and the reviewer.
Yes.
Thank you. Linda, what about you?
So I agree with both Dawn said and what Ben said. So they both basically answered the question the way that I would, but I would kind of flip that around and say, instead of what do you want to ask the funder, what do you want to tell the funder about your organization? So let us know how your work aligns with the priorities of the foundation. I always find that to be important for me to understand. And just like Ben said, you don't want to change your priorities, your goal, your mission and vision to fit the funding priorities. You want to make, and just stay true to who you are as an organization. And then but let us know though, if how your work aligns with the priorities that the foundation has. Help us to know what need it is that you're addressing, and the work that you're doing, how that work meets that need. And then tell us how you've involved. So for us, it's really important, similar to the way, like when we did our grant making redesign, we involved the community in coming in and helping us to look at how we do our grant making. And it was a year-long process. So like I said, we live out our values. Whatever we're asking the nonprofits, we're living it out ourselves as a foundation. So similar to that, we like to know how you involve those that you're serving in the design of your services, your programs, and your projects that will directly impact them. And for us, this goes to authentic engagement.
Wonderful. Thank you. I feel like I want to just lift up one of the things you said and say it for the people in the back of the room. Like, the part about don't share, shifting your priorities and what you're doing to the funder. Instead, be true to who you are. I think it's one of the main things we're saying in our training all the time, which is don't chase the funding. Don't chase the funding, but be true to who you are and the need that you're serving. So I would feel really hurt to hear you share that back. Okay, so this one came in live, which I think is a great question too. And can any of you share more about your foundation's approach to evaluating and demonstrating impact? So what works? How are you responding to, and what are you asking and wanting for your applicants in terms of demonstrating impact and evaluating their programs, either individual projects or across your portfolios? Okay, so where did I leave off with where I started? I think, Linda, I'm ready to start with you. Lost my.
And so, yes, so again, I'm not sure if this will continue to be a part of how we do our grant application going forward, but we haven't actually done a quote unquote evaluation of programs. We're trying to implement elements of what's called trust-based philanthropy, where we're asking on the application for you to tell us through stories about how you feel the work that you're doing is impacting the community. But we're not necessarily giving you not necessarily saying that you have to evaluate from A to Z with 5 questions or 10 questions, the impact that you did in the community, that you had in the community. However, it is helpful for us to know, like, for example, I have the portfolio for housing grants, So what I tend to like to know is a little bit about, like, how the funds that we've provided, how many homes that maybe have been built, or apartments that have been, been restored, or how many people or no longer homeless, things like that. But mostly through stories. So not necessarily just through quantitative data, but sometimes through qualitative data. So the stories can be just, the stories of how you've impacted the community through the work that you've done can be just as important to us as the numbers, the hard data.
Thank you. And for your foundation, like, let's say your housing portfolio, do you prefer those, so if they were saying, that question about how do you measure impact, you would, if they were, if a grant writer or grant seeker was sharing something about, we're going to have conversations with the people that we serve, and they provide a story somewhere in the application, that's something that your foundation really values. Is that what I hear you saying?
And oftentimes, they'll tell us, when they're doing the application, they'll say, we have, 150 apartments that we're restoring, or some new apartments that we're building. So they let us know that. The other thing too is periodically, or I get emails all the time with updates from grantees, just their regular newsletter letting us know. Again, it's not a requirement, but it's just something that telling us kind of what's going on, and also inviting us to open houses. There was one nonprofit that had a brand new set of homes built and invited us to come in and actually take a tour and see them. So again, it's another way of evaluation, but it's not telling the organization that you have to invite us or you have to send us a newsletter. It's up to them, the way that they want to share their stories of impact.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you so much. Then I'm going to move on to you. We're talking about measuring impact and evaluating programs.
Yeah, this is really a timely question for me because I've been building out what we call our monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework for my program in particular. And so we've been going through a lot of these different sessions. So let me just walk you through what I've been thinking so you guys can understand how at least the Packard Foundation does it. Again, like every foundation is very different. Not every foundation will do the same amount of thinking here or the same way of thinking. But this is how we do it. As you're coming up with your theory of change as a foundation, part of that is how do we kind of measure and see if we're actually going to actualize that entire theory. And so you come up with a certain number of questions, like, here are my assumptions for what I need to happen. And let me question those assumptions. What are the learning questions I need to ask to see if I've tested those assumptions, to see if these hypotheses actually are correct? And part of that means I have to come up with certain types of metrics. And so when I come up with these metrics, things that I look at are, what I'm trying to do in my work is create some mindset and behavioral changes. And so as I'm thinking of putting together reports I would want from my grantees, things I would look at are, do you think that the people that you're working with actually change their mindsets or the behaviors, and how has that been actually visualized? So those are one way that we would look for in our reports from our grantees. Another way we would do it at scale is something that's beyond just what our grantees would do. We would consider doing surveys or polls that's from a third party to see if that's actually extrapolated and trickled down to the greater community. Now, what we do at the Packard Foundation, at least in my portfolio, is in our current grant making, we actually do similar to what Linda's talking about in terms of trust-based philanthropy, and what that means for the Packard Foundation. My work is that we actually don't have written reports. We've gotten rid of written reports and we've moved completely to oral reports, which means we hop on a 1-hour call at least once a year and just to ask the questions over the phone so that we can actually get the answers, as opposed to having you spend time, have a grant writer write down all the different things and send that to us. And so hopefully that reduces the grantee's burden for when you actually have to do the reporting. I would say that the best case scenario in terms of a really outstanding organization are ones that reach out to us more than just that once a year phone call. Someone that keeps in touch with us regularly. So it could be once a month, it could be once every 2 months, however often that you have something that you think is a good update that you would like to send to us. It doesn't have to be a phone call. It could be just a short email sending some highlights of what has worked, what hasn't worked, and just really building a real relationship with your program officer so that we know that you're doing things out there and that we trust you inherently, and so that we don't need to just be emailing you because we haven't heard from you for so long. I think that's really the gold standard of what a really trust-based philanthropy can look like.
I love that. You've done away with the written grant proposals. That's amazing. I have a follow-up for you, Ben, that's I think specific to you, to your foundation, and maybe the donor advised funds for you, Linda. But the question is about that your grant applications are closed at this time, and the question is about, well, do you know when it'll be open? Will it be open? Is that something that's changing? And I think this is really the question of like, how do we approach foundations when it's like by invitation only?
Yeah, so generally at the Packard Foundation, we actually don't accept public applications. And so if you were to send an application online or just an email, that's great. Largely how we view our jobs as program officers is that we go out into the field. We hire issue experts as our program officers who should know the field pretty well, both the content and the people, the players in the field. And so when we create our theory of change, we generally have an idea as to what is it in terms of an organization or a leader that we're looking for to actually carry through the mission that we want to see done through the theory of change. And so we actually go out and find our own grantees. That said, I get in my email inbox proposals to meet all the time. And I welcome that. So if that is something that you're interested in, I know people at the Packard Foundation, other colleagues of mine get that all the time, regardless of whether or not a proposal was sent in. People will just set up a meeting or ask for one. We'll be honest though, sometimes if it's something that's clearly out of my portfolio, a few days ago, I got, I work in democracy. I got a recycling proposal a few days ago that was very much outside of my portfolio. So they got an email response back from me saying, thank you for your consideration, but this is not in my portfolio. So I would just say, before you do a cold email, to really just at least look at the biography online as to what my portfolio is. And that way it would save both you and program officers time.
Great. Thank you. And Don, I'm going to go to you. We're talking about measuring impact and evaluation.
Yes, yeah. So I agree with my colleagues here on the call that trust-based philanthropy is a very important work that we've been doing at the NCAI Foundation, and the National Congress has been moving money into tribal nations for over 30 years. So we now have the Equity and Sovereignty Framework, which acknowledges that each tribal nation is a sovereign government with its own rights, its priorities, its own methods, its own outcomes that are unique. And so that is an essential part of how we are defining our success. Protecting sovereignty is a mission for us. It's foundational. So we want to use community-defined outcomes. It's often inappropriate for even a foundation, even the NCAI Foundation, to ask for a sovereign government's statistics or financial documents. So how do we respect sovereignty and at the same time are able to show our impact, show that we're making change in the communities? So we do a layered impact. What changed for individuals? What are the stories? What is the narrative? What shifted in systems? What affects sovereignty? So for instance, next year, the Native American Rights Fund, which is Indian Country's attorneys and our closest partner at the National Congress of American Indians, we're coming up on the 25th anniversary of the Tribal Supreme Court Project. So what happens in one tribal nation could be a threat to tribal sovereignty for everyone. So we want to see what is strengthening tribal sovereignty, what is even strengthening tribal education departments that is not about test scores? What is building a self-determined infrastructure for future generations? We had a program called the SCO Vote Den mini grants recently during the last presidential election, where we were giving funding out to everything from needing childcare for register to vote projects and we're able to do that and hear the stories from people on the ground because we have that trust-based model. We want to marry together the story and the data, combining the qualitative stories that Linda was talking about, and then also the hard data that Ben is talking about. So what we look at is a risk to not having the data. So back to that same program where we were giving out grants for getting out the native vote and for civic engagement. After the election, there were statistics that said that 65% of Native Americans voted in X amount of way. And we actually were able to challenge that data from a national news source because we actually know what was happening on the ground. In the initial survey said that 65% of Native Americans voted for Donald Trump. And when we analyzed the data, and we're one of 5 census sites in the nation, when we were able to evaluate the data, we saw that there were only 200 people in that survey, and none of whom were on reservations, and all of whom self-identified as Native Americans. So we were able to partner with Illuminative, Native American Rights Fund, Native Organizers Alliance to build out our narrative based on what we know is happening on the ground. So we want to see, where sovereignty and self-determination meet equity, and in this layered impact approach. And we want to be able to do the heavy lifting on behalf of our grantee partners.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, the time is really flying by. I feel like I would be remiss to not touch on one quick topic before I have you each do a closing, your final comments, and that is the role of AI. It comes up in every class that I teach about your foundation's perspective on AI, both from the perspective of your foundation using it to review proposals, but also from a grant seeker's perspective of using it for the proposals that they submit. Now, Ben, I know it's not going to apply to you because you don't have written proposals anymore, but let's see. But I'm going to start with you to see if you have anything to share about AI, and then we'll circle around and we'll do our closing comments then.
Yeah, I think AI is going to be a huge player in this world going forward. I use AI almost every day in my work. And the part of it is it's like what Google was for me 2 years ago, where it was my primary researcher for information. I use AI now, and of course you always have to double, triple check because AI, ChatGPT and others, Claude, they all still hallucinate information, which means they sometimes make up information. So you gotta verify it to make sure you're actually using the correct data. But in the way that I use it, and the rest of the Packard Foundation, AI is a resource in terms of helping with thought generation. However, because we, again, as we mentioned, we don't use written reports, or at least for my team, we don't use AI for any reports. We still get written proposals. We ask for proposals when you ask for funding at the beginning, but we don't use AI for that. We actually physically do read all of those to make sure that they are in compliance with the work that we need them to be. But beyond that, I would say one other interesting point is within my democracy, rights, and governance team, my colleague leads work on AI when it comes to democracy and how we can both help to mitigate the harms of AI in our work for democracy, but also how do we take advantage of its benefits. So I just wanted to say that because I know that AI is going to be a big both challenge and also an opportunity, and it's becoming an increased funder space. I know that other funders are using AI in different spaces beyond democracy as well, both in spaces like social cohesion, how do we create a more cohesive society, others in education and climate. So AI is going to be a component of many different funding portfolios going forward.
Thank you. Dawn?
Yeah, I'll just say very briefly, because we only have a couple minutes left, is that, you know, at the foundation, we respect innovation, but we also come from peoples whose governance systems are thousands of years old and are connected to this land. And so we want to always know whose voice is speaking. We do have grant agreements that talk about the use of generative AI. And if you cannot complete a grant proposal without the use of generative AI, we do ask that you have a conversation. So we want to make sure that it's coming from your community, your people, your lived experience, and that it is serving you. But I mean, I use AI all the time.
Thank you. And Linda?
So at the foundation, this is something that we are actually talking about, you know, within our team, you know. Currently, we do not review proposals using AI. I mean, we're actually just reading the proposals, and there's quite a bit of paper, you know, but there's no tool that we put the proposals through to read, that's you know, AI generative, you know. But it is something that we're talking about in the foundation, because we may not know if someone wrote a proposal using AI. So we're having those conversations about how would we know, and does it matter, and those types of things. We also want to make sure that that there's equity in the proposals that are written, you know. So there are going to be some small nonprofits that may not have a grant writer or anyone on staff, and may not even know how to use the AI tools, for example. And then there may be some really large, very heavily funded nonprofits that could do that. So so this is something that we're talking about. We haven't landed yet on it, you know, in terms of a statement about it, but it's something that we're talking about.
Wonderful. Thank you. So we're just have one more minute. I want to just quickly go through and just any final words or words of wisdom or encouragement that you have for our viewers out there. And Linda, I'll start with you and end with Dawn.
Yeah. So I'll say that just in like my colleagues have said, ways to kind of get a hold of us, just kind of look at our priorities, reach out. We have an open door at the foundation. So reach out. And if you have questions, if you want to send us updates about your organization, we're fine with that. You know, in terms of because we want to build a relationship with those that we fund. And I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you. Ben?
Yeah, I echo that. My email is on my website, so feel free to email me if you'd like to continue the conversation. I also want to stress that we understand like this is a really tough time across the country and the world right now. And so thank you for all the work that all of you are doing to help make sure our communities are stronger, and continue to keep going on the good work. Thank you.
Thank you. Dawn?
Yes, and I'll just pick up on what my colleagues Linda and Ben have said is that things shift and change even as federal dollars roll back or policy windows close. Don't shrink your vision, expand your relationships, your clarity, how you are rooted, and, you know, refuse to let your people be erased. We have survived termination.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, first of all, to our panelists. Thank you so much for your participation, being here, and for your insight. I definitely am going back to watch this one because all of you have dropped some real gems of encouragement, but also some practical tips. I want to thank all of our viewers out there. Thank you for sending in all your wonderful questions. Tried to get to as many as we possibly could. So thank you for that. And of course, thank you again to our sponsors, Foundant Technologies, Grant Station, and the Grantsmanship Center. We will be sending you all this recording, so I hope you will enjoy it again and again. Look for that follow-up email. And lastly, save the date. July 30th is our next funder panel with 3 more illustrious panelists rather. So you'll get a reminder email for that. And so on behalf of the Grantsmanship Center, we want to thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Take care, everyone.